Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed video of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, once David Grusch can share his sources.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely. But even if it's alien craft and not Chinese drones...
Whew. It's a very exciting time.
Yeah. And just a quick reminder for you all before we get into it, you can find the show notes at veryexcitingtime.com, or you can support us by going to patreon.com/veryexcitingtime, where you can also find extra content like the Q&A that we just recorded.
Mm-hmm. All right, Chuck, I've got a good show for you today. We are going to be talking about something that has been on hearts and minds since June of last year. Everybody's asking, everybody's wondering. I'm gonna roll back the clock. So it's June 2023. David Grusch has just been interviewed by Ross Coulthart on News Nation. He's revealing his big story. There's a secret government crash retrieval program that's been illegally hidden from Congress. Ross is asking him all sorts of questions. And at one point, Ross says, "Now you say this cover-up has been going on for nearly 90 years. And Grusch goes, "Yeah, that's right." And anybody who's been in the UFO field is like, wait, 90? 1947 was only like 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And Grusch goes, "That's right. 1933 was the first recovery in Europe, in Magenta, Italy. They recovered a partially intact vehicle. The Italian government moved it to a secure airbase in Italy for the rest of the fascist regime until 1944 to 45. Pope Pius XXII back-channeled that and told the Americans what the Italians had, and we ended up scooping it."
Wow. So... Okay, first, before I respond to that, what brought this back up this week? Was there more news about it?
Nothing at all.
Or just...
No,
okay,
it's
great.
just been on my show list for a while now. I wanted to do it.
This is great. So you just wanted to get weird.
I just wanted to get weird with it. We're kind of alternating. We did a bunch of serious stuff last week. Let's have fun with it this week. Let's talk about a historical case.
Cool. Well, I love this. I am particularly delighted that the Pope is involved, and I'm ready to get weird.
Yeah, totally. And that was Ross's reaction too. He's like, "Wait, the Vatican knows about this?" Yeah. And Grusch was like, "That's right, buddy."
That's awesome.
Now, a couple of weeks later, in an interview with La Parisienne newspaper, Grusch expanded on his claim. He said, in 1933, a bell-like craft around 10 meters in size was recovered in Magenta, northern Italy. It was kept by Mussolini's government until 1944, when it was recovered by agents of the OSS.
Wait, open source software?
No. The Office of Strategic Services, which is the precursor to the CIA that was operating during World War II. So basically, a lot more sense. The CIA swept in and took this thing from Mussolini's government after it fell.
That's funny.
Now, here's something I think a lot of people have forgotten about. I certainly had. I remember listening to an interview with Lou Elizondo in May of 2021. And Lou does this thing where Lou, for anybody who's not placing the name immediately, former director of ATIP, he was heavily involved in the 2017 story that kind of broke all this into the public. Lou loves to tease things. He is extremely careful about what he can and cannot say, which can be very frustrating, but also, I imagine, is extremely frustrating for his handlers because Lou will dance right up to the line. He'll go as far as he can and stop at the last possible second. I'm picturing the government sensors like right off screen, like,
they've got the big beep button,
right?
Like, ready to go.
So in an interview, Lou said, Roswell may not have been the first event. Roswell famously in 1947. He says, there's been some reporting internationally that there have been some crashed vehicles, and they were obtained by local authorities, and there was some scientific study done on them. I've personally seen some documentation that's very compelling from Italy, where they had a recovery of a vehicle, and after World War II, allegedly, parts of that vehicle were brought to the United States. There is some documentation that has been validated that was from Mussolini himself, and it is authentic. The documentation has been proven to be authentic. So certainly interesting.
What I wonder, okay, so if it's from Mussolini himself, like, is it just Mussolini saying, yeah, we got a UFO? Or is it like,
we'll get into it.
He's not the most trustworthy,
What we've got is something called the fascist files, which broke out around 2001 and is what we're going to be talking about today. This is kind of the root of this legend. Now, I want to be clear because I think a lot of people, the fascist files have been around in the UFO world for a while, and they're a little controversial, which we'll talk about.
Okay.
For some of the reasons you mentioned. But Grusch clarified in a later interview that I will quote later that he did not get this from the internet. This is not David Grusch telling us, I read this wild thing online. Apparently a UFO crashed in it. He heard this from one of his firsthand whistleblowers who saw firsthand material related to this. So what I see this as, the reason we're talking about this at all is this was a story that had already leaked. It was a little controversial, and Grusch basically confirmed it. And the thing that we've been seeing with Grusch, the thing that's really interesting is he had access to all of the stuff. And the reason he blew the whistle was not because the U.S. government shouldn't have this stuff. He blew the whistle because they were breaking the law by not telling Congress. If they had been properly notifying Congress, we never would have heard any of this shit.
That's true. Yeah.
The cover-up went too aggressively for our good boy David Grusch to handle.
That is hilarious to think about. Like, they just followed the rules. Could have just kept it all under wraps.
Absolutely.
Also, do you think, I feel like the fascist files has to be like the Italian version of the X-Files, like TV show.
A little bit. Yeah.
I really want to watch it.
Yeah. So all of this starts around between 1996 and 1999. There are several Italian journalists involved, but the main one is an Italian journalist and ufologist named Roberto Pinotti. Sorry,
Panini.
Panini. I'm so sorry, Roberto.
Just because we're talking about Italy, not everything is a panini.
Oh my God. I'm going to butcher some names today, y'all. I'm really sorry. So he and a few other guys received a series of documents, both photocopies and originals, from an anonymous source who they call Mr. X.
Ooh.
These documents describe a UFO crash near Milan in 1933, another well-documented sighting in 1936, and they also discussed a secret government UFO investigation body called RS-33, which is the Special Research Cabinet of 1933. That cabinet was established directly by Mussolini and run by... Oh, no, I wrote down my pronunciation notes and I lost them. Let's see if I can get it.
No, it's there. To the scroll to the right.
I know, but I've got it collapsed. So it was established by Mussolini and it was run by Guglielmo Marconi.
Nice. Good job. You did it. He's been practicing for 20 minutes.
Guglielmo Marconi.
Guglielmo. Okay, wait. So I had a line. This Marconi, the inventor of the radio?
Yeah. Absolutely. The same guy. Famous Italian scientist, Nobel Prize winner, Marconi. Yeah.
That's
Also,
wild.
apparently, headed up a secret Italian UFO program.
I mean, yeah, what else are you going to do after midlife? But did you know that he was 20 years old when he first demonstrated like radio telegraphy in his attic in his house?
Did not know that.
What what were you doing when you were 20?
Learning how to mix vodka screwdrivers and being hungover. Like,
Yeah. Flunking out of college, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Although on the other hand, he was doing this with his butler, so there might have been different circumstances involved here. Like,
Oh, when you need to
slightly
send secret messages to your butler.
right. Yeah.
So, Panotti and his partner, Alfredo Lissoni, they were skeptical about these documents, right? These are unsourced documents from an
Yeah,
unknown
right.
person just showing up in the mail one day.
Right.
And to their credit, they did not immediately breathlessly rush out to report on it. They sat
Yeah,
on the
good.
documents for a number of years, to the great frustration of Mr. X, who sent
Oh, I
more
bet.
documents to other journalists. And then those journalists published them and said that they thought they were fake. And then he sent a letter complaining about that. Anyway, while they were keeping them under wraps, they had the original documents that they had chemically tested and historically analyzed. Chemical composition of the ink and the aging and yellowing of the paper confirmed that these were at least period papers and ink. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not fake, but it means that someone sourced the appropriate materials to produce them. And a historical analysis confirmed that the documents were consistent with genuine fascist era documents. Now, I kind of shrugged that off, but in one of the articles, they went a little more in depth about that. There are, abbreviations, turns of phrase, like ways that these fascist documents were written beyond just, yes, this is proper Italian. And, it mentions people we know. Like, a historical review basically concluded, I am unable to rule out the existence of RS-33 as an official group. There's nothing in here that contradicts known facts. The way that they are written and produced matches documents from the time.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. Right.
So if they were faked, it was made by someone with a very detailed knowledge of fascist government documents using paper and ink from the period. It just makes me wonder if there were any reasons to fake it, because if not, that is expensive and pointless.
Absolutely. And if you were going to fake someone, sending them a photocopy of a document you had is a lot easier than sending them a real document that you've had faked using sourced period paper and ink and, done a great deal of historical research on how to write a period appropriate thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not impossible these are fakes, but someone would have had to put a lot of work into it. And there are easier ways to mislead someone than to give them an original document.
Right.
You should always be skeptical. You should always question. But I do think that Panotti and his partners have done the appropriate amount of legwork to determine that within a reasonable boundary, we can be confident that these are authentic documents.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of details to this RS-33 story. There's other stuff that's come in. I want to talk about 3 groups of documents that are available to us in the English-speaking world. I want to be clear, there is more to the story. And if you speak Italian, you could dig into this to a great degree. There are books written. Panotti has been very available about this. There are only so many things available to me in English that I can properly evaluate and, run through Google Translate myself. So there may be some parts of the story that I'm kind of stretching or filling in. And I cannot tell you whether that's because the original story has been stretched and filled in, or whether I'm just missing a document that's like, oh, that's where they got that claim from.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay.
That said, there's 3 groups of documents that we can have available that we can talk about. First of all, there's a series of telegrams from the state news agency about how to report on the crashed vehicle. There's a set of instructions detailing what to do with a crash recovery. And there's a long letter about the sighting of a flying cigar in 1936. So we've got a crash in 33, and we've got a group set up to study it. And then we've got a UFO sighting in 36.
Okay. Interesting.
So up first, we've got these telegrams. So these are government telegrams. They're sent official. They're marked as official, sent from Milan. They are marked as priority and most confidential.
Okay.
All 3 are sent by the director of special affairs for the Stefani News Agency.
I wonder. Okay.
Now, the Stefani News Agency is like the regime's, like, I believe, only approved news source. They're the agency that gives out fascist information and propaganda. So this isn't just like the newspaper said this. It's like the government said this via their newspaper.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So these memos very clearly paint a picture of Mussolini's government trying to suppress knowledge about a crashed vehicle. So the first one, frustratingly, is not dated. The other 2 are dated. We assume this first one is sent in the same time period. It looks the same. It has the same marks. It seems to discuss the same thing, but technically we don't know. But it reads, by superior order, it is arranged to deal with the following news spread by Stefani Dispatch today. The aircraft mentioned above is recognized as a meteor. Repeat, meteor. By the Brera Astronomical Observatory. Give the news minimal graphical relevance, no need for corrections.
Wow. Okay. So it was just a bunch of nerd shit. Don't worry about it. Downplay.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. We got some nerds. They said it's fine.
Yeah.
Second telegram is June 13th, 1933 at 4 p.m. By personal order. By personal order of Il Duce, which, if you're not familiar, is the title for Mussolini himself, absolute silence is ordered regarding the alleged landing on national soil by an unknown aircraft. The same applies to today's Stefani Dispatch and individual journalists. Maximum penalties for violators enforced by State Security Tribunal.
Wow. Alleged landing. Translation. Stop talking about the UFO, guys.
Right? 1 hour later, June 13th, 5 p.m., by personal order of Il Duce, immediate arrest is said to be made for spread of news relating to the aircraft of unknown nature and origin mentioned in this morning's Stefani Dispatch. Any newspaper leads concerning said enforcement will be immediately recast. Maximum penalties for violators enforced by State Security Tribunal.
Wow, that escalated quickly.
Right?
1 hour. But I wonder if it was like they sent out the original and everyone was like, oh shit, we got to look up what this unknown aircraft was. And like, but who talked? What happened between 4 and 5 o'clock? I want to know.
Some poor journalist said something at like 4:30 and Mussolini's like, motherfuckers, I told you.
I told you.
So yeah, do these telegrams mean anything on their own? It's noteworthy. They don't mention UFO. That wasn't a term at the time. They say an unidentified, an unknown craft. They refer to a crash. Excuse me. Now it's leading into World War II. There were experimental aircraft everywhere. You know, we're not that far from Germany. Germany is obviously experimenting with stuff. So nothing here necessarily screams non-human.
Right.
But there's definitely a larger than usual amount of security around this crash. Craft crashed, but they weren't immediately hushed up under threat of maximum penalties and arrest.
Right.
Usually.
Yeah, that feels like the only way that would happen is if like Il Duce got a call from Germany. Like,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell your people to shut up.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so next up, there is a letter describing the strategy to be followed after the craft had been recovered, or rather, what to do to recover the craft. So it got a bunch of steps. Step 1, notify the governor.
Yeah, sure.
Step 2, arrange for immediate recovery of the aircraft.
Yeah, makes sense.
Step 3, immediately arrest all witnesses. Appoint a special section RS-33 of the Gestapo.
Wow. Okay, that escalated very quickly.
Right? Holy shit. So yeah, again, RS-33 is the special research group of 1933 that was formed by Mussolini, headed by Marconi, to look into the UFOs. And they're saying, arrest everyone and put a special UFO researcher guy from the Gestapo in charge of it.
Yeah, I didn't realize RS-33 was Gestapo. That's also interesting.
It's not. No, that's the research group. They're saying, like, basically delegate someone from the Gestapo to be the RS-33 guy in charge of these.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it.
Step 4, address each report with maximum secrecy and precedence over all priorities to the Central Meteorological Office at the Sapienza University of Rome, exclusive reference cabinet RS-33.
Meteorological Office? That it all kind of made sense until that point.
I think what we're seeing here is what we also see in the US in the early days, where nobody really knows what group this goes under. In the US, it fell under the Department of Energy because they were worried these things might be atomic, but also the Department of Energy already had the tightest set of secrecy. This feels to me like a similar thing. I don't know. Send it to the meteorological office. We'll lock it down.
They're the ones that have all the radars, like whatever.
Something like that. Exactly. Yeah. Step 5, prevent the dissemination of any news, especially to the press.
Classic. We do that now.
Step 6, for the purpose of the previous point, it is necessary to publish, from time to time, very short articles in which the phenomenon is reported to its, and they emphasize this next part, authentic and unique celestial nature. Meteor, shooting star, planet, luminous halo, iris, perihelion, etc.
Oh, they forgot swamp gas.
Right? It's so funny. The playbook is right there. Like, okay, listen, we're not going to be able to say nothing. So, like, write a little something. Like, I don't know. It was a shooting star. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Step 7, the transmission of reports to the Air Force is subject to the prior favorable opinion of the RS-33 Cabinet Authority, whose decisions are final up to the top hierarchy of Il Duce.
Huh. So, I mean, at least as far as UAP goes, it sounds like the Air Force works about the same in fascist Italy as it does now here.
Yeah. I think we had the opposite problem in the US where the Air Force was the only one and you weren't allowed to tell the Navy or the Army or anyone. But yeah, the same thing. Like we see one government body saying, don't tell anybody else about this.
Right. But in the Air Force, they also say, don't ever talk about this. That's what I was saying.
True story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Step 8, strict exclusion of any other scientific body from the collection and examination of available reports, including the Pontifical University.
Translation. Please stop telling the Pope about UFOs. He gets really weird and thoughtful when you do this.
Yeah. So it's unclear who this letter was sent to or from, what degree of authority it has. Is this referring to the 1933 crash? Like, by inference, it seems to be related. It seems to be the same. Once again, There's nothing here that's technically about alien craft.
Right.
But similarly, this is an absurd level of classification and stovepiping for,
Shooting
a
stars.
crashed French or German plane. Like
Right. Yeah.
it's just an absurd overreaction.
Or for meteors as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and in this case, they very clearly mentioned recover the craft. So they're saying it's craft. It's just not necessarily alien.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Now we're going to skip forward a few years. So that was all 1933.
Okay.
We've had some UFO sightings in like 31. We have this crash in 33. They very quickly spin up a government investigation body. They recover the wreckage. They arrest anybody who saw it. Nobody talk about this. In 1936, sorry, go ahead.
Side note, interesting thing I kind of came across when I was researching some of this. Like the early 30s, Italy was going through a huge renaissance in aircraft capability and Air Force capability.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's also this dawning recognition of the importance of aircraft and the Air Force and everything.
Now, to be fair, that was happening everywhere. But yes, Italy and Germany were definitely leading the charge of what aircraft were capable of. You're not alone in noticing the parallels here. We're about to discuss in 1936, they saw this weird cigar-shaped, it sounds like a rocket. It's got flames coming out the back, right? And I think it was the next year, Italy made their first jet plane.
Yeah, the Messerschmitt, yeah.
Yeah. Now, obviously correlation is not causation, but you would not be the first in the UFO community to be like, huh.
Yeah, the V2 was developed between 1936 and 1942.
Right.
Interesting.
All right. So 1936, we've got this handwritten letter that I believe was sent to RS-33, but I'm not sure. It's describing a UFO encounter. Dear Valibergi, it was observed in the morning. It was a metallic disc, polished and reflecting light, with a length of 10 or 12 meters. 2 fighter aircraft from a nearby Air Force base took off, but were not able to reach it, even traveling at 130 kilometers per hour.
That isn't fast for a fighter, even in 36. Like,
yeah.
So I was looking this up, and the Fiat CR32 from 1933 easily get twice that or more.
Yeah.
But I wonder if they weren't, maybe they weren't actually fighters, or maybe they were multiple generations behind.
Maybe. Yeah. So there's a couple of obvious possibilities here. One is, obviously this is a fake.
I suppose. Yeah. Right.
I'm inclined actually to think this makes it more realistic. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Mistakes aren't something you leave in a fake because people suspect them. And this is a really obvious mistake. How fast were jets in 1930? Well, they weren't 130 kilometers an hour. Like, it's not hard to look that up. So I'm more inclined to think it's a typo in the original, like maybe they meant to write 230 or 330 or some other number, but they fudged the number, but the content is authentic. But I fully admit 130 kilometers is not fast. And this definitely makes you raise an eyebrow at this part in the letter.
Yeah. Unless they really were just old as shit.
Right? Yeah, like biplanes or something.
Biplanes were super common still in in the 30s.
We sent the Wright brothers up. They weren't able to catch this thing.
Yeah.
They were pedaling as fast as they.
And couldn't you imagine, like, even our current government, like, they see something weird, they may not send the most expensive fighter after it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
yeah, the letter continues. The object did not emit any sound, which would lead one to consider an aerostat, which is a fancy word for balloon. But nobody knows of balloons that can fly faster than the wind. And I know for sure it was seen by other pilots.
Even in the 30s, they couldn't rule out balloons.
I know, right? It's so funny. Then, after approximately an hour, it was seen as a sort of metallic tube, gray or slate in color, like a kind of aerial torpedo with very clear windows and alternating white and red lights. It was followed by 2 hats, like those used by priests. These were wide, round, with a dome in the center, metallic, and followed the torpedo without changing their relative positions.
I'm sorry, I'm looking something up because it sounds like a Zeppelin almost, but Zeppelins were too slow.
Zeppelins were way too slow. Yeah.
They maxed out at like 110.
They didn't have fire coming up back.
Oh yeah, that too. Okay. Yeah. So you're like, is this, I'm imagining kind of like the old like classic rocket shape with the like curved things. Are you thinking it's...
Yeah, there's actually an illustration in the letter.
Oh, okay.
If you look at one of the links in the show notes, you'll be able to find it. But yeah, basically it kind of looks like a SpaceX rocket. Like it's got a great big fairing at the back where the thrust comes out, and it's got, windows along the side. Like you're not far off if you're imagining a Flash Gordon style rocket or a SpaceX booster. Like it's a big mechanical looking thing. And one of the things we've talked about with things like the Tic Tac or your classic saucer shape is they look like physical. They look like real objects, but they don't look like human made objects. You don't see obvious things like bolts and rivets and, like seams. They seem to be more complete. This thing, the drawing, looks like something you could build. Like nobody had this tech at the time, but it looks like a rocket. But it's followed by 2 little classic saucers. It's crazy.
That's wild. Just for completeness, I looked up the speed of the V2 rocket because apparently that's what we're doing now, and
Sure.
And it was a saucy 5,700 kilometers per hour.
It's
a little different.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, the letter concludes, the prefecture has opened an inquiry, but you can imagine that it will make little inroads and have a similar outcome to that of 1931. Il Duce has expressed his worries because he says if it was an English or French aircraft, his foreign policy would have to start all over again.
Wait, 1931? What was going on there?
Yeah, now this is another one of the little gaps in the English language material I was able to find. Okay. There are references to sightings in 1931, but no details. So my understanding of the timeline is there were UFO sightings in Italy in 1931, which caused them to kind of already be paying attention. Then in 33, this thing crashes. They immediately set up an inquiry to investigate it. And they continue paying attention to this stuff. And in 1936, the same group gets this report about this weird cigar-shaped SpaceX booster followed by 2 flying saucers.
This is wild. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely. So to circle back, because that's kind of the summary of what Pinotti has. And when you look at the reports that they've written, they talk about these documents. They talk about authenticating the documents. They go on a whole journey about they believe that the craft was recovered and it was kept in this one particular building. And here's why they think it was this building. And oh, by the way, isn't it interesting that this is the one structure for miles around that the Allies didn't bomb? Maybe they knew there was something in there. And maybe it was moved to this secret bunker in the hill, or maybe the Nazis took it. But everybody agrees the Allies took it. Like, it's kind of a mess from this point forward. None of Pinotti's documents say anything about aliens. None of them say anything about it being a space vehicle. That's kind of left for us to infer. It is entirely possible that we are dealing with the crash of a top secret prototype vehicle from Germany or somewhere else. But again, the reaction's kind of off the charts for something like that. So it's an unusual thing. It's a weird thing. It's not conclusive. I can't say like, oh, this was definitely alien, but it's weird. It's very weird. Now, our good boy, David Grusch, was actually interviewed in November last year by Roberto Pinotti, and he added some more details about his claim. Roberto actually asked him, he's like, hey, you mentioned my case. Like, what do you know about it?
Exciting.
Right? And Grusch says, some of my interview subjects that I ultimately directed to the Inspector General, they did give me a briefing on all the U.S. involved recoveries that happened over the years. That's something we haven't heard before.
Yeah.
Like Grusch got briefed on all the U.S. led recoveries. Like we knew that he knew there was a program, but that's an exciting tidbit. He said, and the Mussolini case, that, interestingly enough, is already out in the public vernacular thanks to your work.
Yeah.
Uncovering that case and the 1933 Magenta area crash was one of the events that they talked about in their briefing. And that was one that I submitted in my DoD pre-publication review to be able to talk about publicly, because I thought that was a very remarkable international case that was hopefully spur not just U.S. interest, but European interest.
Yeah, nice. It's really cool to hear, just the Grusch is getting to talk to Pinotti and give more info, but also that that Grusch wasn't just pulling from Pinotti. He was adding on to it from firsthand sources.
I think that point is critical, and you're gonna talk to people about the Magenta crash, and they're going to be skeptical about it. This case has been out there since the early 2000s. Italian journalists are extremely divided on whether these documents are credible. So when Grusch came out and started talking about something that a lot of people have kind of already decided was BS, to a lot of people, it was a mark against Grusch. I find it extremely reassuring that Grusch didn't find out about this on the internet. He wasn't watching the Y-Files or something like this. He was briefed on it by guys who were looking at U.S. documentation from our side of when we recovered this vehicle. Now, did that actually happen? Were these guys lying to Grusch? There's a whole other slew of questions, but Grusch did not find out about this from a Pinotti. This is one of those things where the story has leaked independently, and we already knew about it. And in a weird way, it's kind of been confirmed by Grusch.
Yeah, right.
Now, Grusch adds a few details about the crash, which I find fascinating. I think you will too. He says, what's interesting about that crash, and this is some stuff I haven't stated publicly, but I did submit for security review, was when it came down, when they went to recover it, it had sort of an acorn or a bell shape. But what really happened there is they believe the original craft was lenticular or saucer shaped. But when it crashed, when they came to recover it, all the edges were broken off around the craft. So it looked like a bell or an acorn. So really, it had additional characteristics that were destroyed when it landed. So imagine a traditional saucer shape hits the ground so hard that it flattens on the bottom and deforms into this bell shape.
Oh, right. Yeah. Interesting.
Right?
It makes me think about the crumple zone in modern cars.
Absolutely. This thing's designed to do this.
Yeah.
Grusch continues. He goes, but Pope Pius XII was involved. He sent a communique through the American OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. They were the intelligence agency of the U.S. during World War II, and it ended up going to FDR's desk. But as far as I know, unless the records were destroyed, the Vatican and the Pope Pius XII section of the Vatican Secret Archives, there should be documented evidence. From what I was told, now these intelligence officers that briefed me on this, that had firsthand knowledge, they assumed that the Vatican still had those records and they were not destroyed. And of course, this was ultimately recovered at the end of the war and went into U.S. possession after the war.
Okay, I have something to say here. We've talked a lot about whether we would want to have access to that info if we couldn't say it or whatever. 100%. I want to go to the Vatican Secret Archives because I think it would be so much cooler than the US archives. Like, be all arches and gold and weird locks made by geniuses 600 years ago, and like
the UFO records are tucked in between like the bones of some old saint. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, the US archives are going to be like, you know, the freaking dusty Indiana Jones warehouse out in Utah or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so Diana Walsh-Pasulka actually talks about the Vatican Secret Archives a bit in her book. And one of the things she mentions is the people who work in the secret archives are a little annoyed that that's how they're known in the English-speaking world, because it better translates to private archives. It's not a secret at all. It's right there. Any academician can... Academician? That's not a word. Any academic can apply for access. It is a private archive. You can't just walk in. But you absolutely... It does exist. It is open to researchers from all over the world.
Really?
Go all the time. So
okay, I feel like we should go. Like, find an excuse.
Now, I wouldn't
to
be surprised if the Vatican also had a secret archive that we don't know about. It's just funny that this archive is called the Secret Archive when really it's just the Vatican Library. Is probably a better way to think of it.
Can your heist book involve the Vatican Secret Archive? Because that would be amazing.
Maybe it will.
Okay. All right. So wait. Okay, I'm lost. What happened to Marconi? I thought he was in RS-33, and he just kind of like disappeared from the discussion.
That is a great question, and I feel the same way, because anybody who talks about it is like, oh, it's this incredible story. We got these documents signed by Mussolini himself, and Marconi is heading up the science. Well, okay, the documents signed by Marconi are like faxes, basically, from his office. And as far as we can tell, Marconi was the head in name only. So it's a little unclear. RS-33, as you heard in the documents that I saw, is barely touched on. It's mentioned a lot in the instructions document. It's briefly mentioned in the telegrams, I believe. And we think that letter was sent to or from RS-33. But like, there aren't a lot of details about it, like, and then Mussolini set this up. That's all these guys inferring. Again, unless there are documents that I'm not seeing or more details that are in Italian language. But Pinotti definitely implies that there's more. And what I can say is, at the time, Marconi was head of the Italian Royal Academy. He's basically Italy's chief scientist. He is a famous dude. He's, I believe, in his 70s at this point. He's a Nobel Prize winner. Everyone knows him. The country's on war footing. Like, of course, if you're going to set up an investigative body with scientists, Marconi's going to be involved. And the other members that are mentioned are all prominent astronomers and scientists and aeronautical engineers, the kind of people you would expect if you were composing a body of the best minds in the country to investigate a weird recovered craft.
Right. Or at least they're the names you would put on a list if you were a fascist dictator, whether or not they were involved,
or if you were faking a list that a fascist dictator would. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, apparently, Marconi thought that we could use the radio to communicate with aliens.
Sure.
This is a claim you see repeated over and over anytime anybody talks about Marconi. If you go to his Wikipedia page, they make it clear that Marconi himself was pretty annoyed that journalists kept boiling what he was saying down to, Marconi thinks Martians are real. Yes, he said some things that were kind of in line with, if Martians are real, we could, maybe talk to them via radio. But he found this whole thing kind of frustrating that it got boiled down that way. And in one of the documents I did read, they explicitly mentioned that Marconi never attended a single RS-33 cabinet meeting. He always sent this other astronomer in his place. So
yeah, totally.
Marconi ran the RS-33 group.
Yep.
Now, there is one little bit of information I found that I wouldn't say it's confirming, but I think it's interesting. The Daily Mail wrote a piece about this, and they interviewed an Italian resident in the area who said that he heard stories about the crash through his family. His great-grandfather was, I don't know what the term is for the role he had, but he's described alternately as the mayor and the head of the police force, or the prefect. Maybe those are all the same thing. I don't know Italian politics of 1933, but
come on.
The point being, he was in a role where he would have had access to see the kind of instructions being sent to the police force and the heads of government in the area.
Sure.
So he was the head of a town about 30 miles from the crash site. The guy says, quote, "It was a secondhand story told to me by my father when I was a child in the early 90s, but it matches the story of the crash. I was told a strange metal plane with no wings crashed somewhere between Vergate and Magenta. I was told there was a big censorship around this crash, and the fascist secret police were sent to the surrounding cities to keep people silent about it."
Wow. That's so interesting. Like, that the secret police could just be like sent out to hush people up.
Now, of course,
now
we can't say for sure that this guy actually heard this story.
Yeah, sure.
Like the newspaper's sniffing around looking for quotes. The story's been out since 2000. It's pretty easy to kind of like, oh yeah, my grandfather told me about that. But what we're kind of seeing here is a bunch of pieces that fit together well and no obvious red flags. And that's the thing that I think is important. Whenever you're dealing with a case like Roswell or anything like this from the 30s or 40s or 50s, you're never going to get definitive proof. You just aren't. The best you can hope for is everything that's there meshes together in a fairly coherent picture, and nothing is obviously wrong, right? Like you're looking for, this telegram used a font that wasn't invented till the 60s. Okay, well, that telegram's a fake. Or, the guy who told us this is a notorious liar, and he's the only source. Things like that. We don't have anything like that. Everything here adds up to paint a picture that an unusual craft crashed in Magenta, Italy in 1933, and there was a significant effort to suppress this news and capture it and pay attention to similar crafts. That's definitely out there. Now, here's where I get to the awkward part of the story.
Okay. All right.
One detail that comes up in the UFO community when discussing the Magenta crash is this idea that there were bodies recovered. And in particular, and I'm doing air quotes here for anybody who's listening to the podcast, Nordic bodies. Tall, human-looking beings with white skin and long blonde hair.
It's like, sounds very Aryan.
Uncomfortably so. Stories about Nordic-type aliens always skis me out. Now, in the UFO community, there are a bunch of kind of like lists of like common alien types. You got your classic grays, you got tall grays, you got short grays. You've got mantises who are interesting, and we talked about them with Anjali. Yeah. And then there's Nordic. And it's just weird that one of the alien types happens to be the kind of like Aryan ideal. Like, ooh, that's it. It always makes me a little uncomfortable. And they're often associated with vaguely pro-Nazi stories about Germany reverse engineering UFOs. Like, Germany, had this incredible program that was way better than anyone thought. And they were working with a race of aliens from the start. It's like, oh man, it skeezes me out. Now, I didn't mention the bodies at all in this story until now. I'm mentioning it because if anybody is listening goes to look this up, they may find like, Scott didn't mention this one pretty jarring red flag. There's a reason I didn't mention it. The story goes that because of these bodies, Mussolini assumed that these were secret German aircraft. Whereas Marconi, because he was a nutball, believed they were Martians. But there is no mention of bodies in the Penotti documents themselves. And when Pinotti interviewed David Grusch, he asked him if Grusch knew if there were any bodies recovered in the 1933 crash. And Grusch said, quote, "I asked that question of my briefers, and the answer was no. They do not recall any kind of biological material coming with it. It was just an artifact that they recovered. So I'm not aware of any bodies, and they were not aware of any either."
But Grusch said that there were bodies recovered elsewhere, right?
He used the term biologics, but yes. Okay. But he also has been very vague about, which crash, if any, did they come from. There have been rumors for years that bodies were recovered as part of Roswell. There are apparently other crashes that have happened, right? Like, we've heard reporting that the U.S. has up to 12 crashed vehicles recovered in various states. So, but the point is, once again, the fact that Grusch has not echoed parts of the story, I actually find very compelling. That reassures me hugely, because I'm very uncomfortable with this Aryan Nordic alien thing.
Yeah. Totally. So okay. Where are we leaving? What's the takeaway? Is this like legit? Is this where are we at?
It's messy, right? And unfortunately, there's no clear answer. What I will say is I went on a journey with this one. I have had a folder of bookmarks in my show notes folder since June of last year when David Grusch mentioned Magenta, Italy. I'm like, well, we definitely have to talk about this. I dug into it, and I was a bit dismissive initially because I thought, oh, this is all based on this single dude's reporting. That's always kind of a red flag. But once I dug into it a little further, like, oh, actually, there's a bunch of people involved, and they were very skeptical about it, and they've had the documents vetted. Not everybody's going to find that convincing, but like I talked about, there are no obvious red flags of the documents that make you go, oh, these are clear forgeries. Like I mentioned, I found the inclusion of Nordic bodies to be a bridge too far, but Grusch denied that. I was skeptical about Grusch parroting this story that had been out in public, but Grusch explained that he didn't hear it from the public. He heard it from his sources, who also didn't hear it from the public. They saw documents and firsthand retrieved materials and things like that. So all of that adds up to be kind of compelling to me. Now, there's one aspect here that I haven't mentioned, which I've taken advantage of you a little bit here, Chuck, your lack of familiarity with the big conspiracy theories in this world. The story about RS-33 is uncannily similar to a story you and I have not talked about, which is Majestic 12. There is a very similar story in the US of a cache of documents that have been validated, but people are still extremely skeptical about, that were leaked to researchers from an anonymous source. There's a lot of disagreement in the community about not just whether they're legit, but whether they are explicit disinformation meant to throw people off the trail.
Interesting.
The whole concept of MK12 is very, very controversial. And the RS-33 story isn't a duplicate of it, but it rhymes.
Yeah. So and you could imagine them, Mussolini's cabinet having a box of these files written at that time, just in case they needed to. Like, the presidents often have two speeches written, one for the thing ended well and one for the thing didn't end well.
Well, and we tend to talk about disinformation with the idea of modern day disinformation agents like Richard Doty misleading people about the past. But another thing to think about is this could have been World War II era disinformation, right? In these documents, we see them saying mislead the public by telling them that it's a meteor and stuff like that. nothing here is out of character for the time. So maybe these are disinformation documents that were produced at the time to mislead spies.
Right.
It's crazy making. It's easy to go in either direction. If you listen to this and you are not convinced, I don't blame you. Totally fine. If you listen to this, you're like, actually, I think there's something to this. Totally fine. I don't think there's enough information to say one way or another.
Yeah.
Where I'm at on it is I don't see any obvious reasons to think this is bullshit. And it's compelling enough, and it slots into my mental understanding of how this story has played out over the years. I would say I'm cautiously confident in it. But I would love to hear what you think. We've been talking about this a lot. Like, where do you land on stories like this?
So I think you and I often talk about run into stories, and one of the metrics you use I really like, and that is how sticky is it in like the Reddit or Twitter sphere.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this has been one of those stubborn ones that doesn't really want to go away. And so I think there's something keeping it alive. The question is whether the thing keeping it alive is truth or hope.
Yeah.
But
and to kind of clarify the point you're making, right? Like, it's not just, is the story sticky? Like, people are interested in it because people talk about a lot of things that I think are bogus. they don't stop. But what I mean is there are occasional flash in the pan stories that pop up in the community and are very quickly debunked. And those ones fall out of favor quickly. That's something to keep an eye on. Something that has staying power in Reddit means that no one was able to debunk it to the level that it immediately fell out of favor. They may have been able to debunk parts of it or found it suspicious, but they weren't able to rule it out entirely.
But also, there's an assumption there that they were able to verify enough of it to make it interesting, because that could also make it go away.
Absolutely.
So the question is whether it's truth or hope that keeps it alive. And either way, it's a very exciting time.
It's a very exciting time. Oh, I love that. God, we picked a good title for our show.
We really did. We nailed it.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You'll find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our social media accounts.
And you can feel free to email us at Scott or Chuck at veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.